Welcome back to the PigX podcast. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. Biosecurity in 2026. Are we prepared or just more aware? It is a question that is top of mind for many working in the swine industry. With diseases like African swine fever, highly pathogenic avian influenza, and others continuing to pose a global threat, impacting livestock operations, we've seen an increased focus on foreign animal disease preparedness. And the industry has invested significant time and resources into developing biosecurity plans. But here's the question. Does having a plan mean you're actually more prepared? On today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Josh Flohr, assistant professor at Kansas State University, to discuss the gap between biosecurity policies on paper and their day-to-day execution on the farm. We'll hear what it takes to build a culture that supports strong biosecurity practices, how communication influences compliance, and whether the industry is truly prepared for the next disease challenge or simply more aware of the risks. To get us started, let's hear more about Josh's background in the swine industry.
I actually grew up an East Coast kid from West Central Maryland. I grew up in a agricultural area. Kind of our model for ag back home were, small dairies, typically a farmer milking somewhere between 50 and 100 cows and farming a couple hundred acres of mixed cereal grains or soybeans. So as I looked into my future, I got active in 4-H and actually pigs were, that's how I got exposed to pigs, were through youth development programs and show pigs. And so as I looked to further my education, I really felt like I needed to come out to the Midwest. One of the avenues or opportunities that I had was actually through livestock judging. So that brought me to Kansas. I went to junior college in El Dorado, Kansas at Butler Community College, received my associates in agriculture there. From there, I actually went and pursued a bachelor's degree at Texas Tech University in Lubbock. Was there and finished there in 2010. And then my passion was always pigs. And as I looked at graduate opportunities, I really came back to wanting to stay in swine. And so that led me to Kansas State, where I received my master's and PhD in swine nutrition. Most of my research would have been focused on micronutrient requirements. I did a lot of vitamin D work, and then also quite a bit on floor space allocation to growing pigs and the impact of space allocation on animal performance. From there, I did consulting nutrition in the upper Midwest for about a year, and then joined the team at Seaboard Foods in 2016. Initially, I started as a nutritionist, but over my time there, I had the chance to lead the vet service team, the biosecurity team, genetic supply, feed mills, and nutrition. So I had the opportunity to work with a lot of great people, get some great experiences, and then here, actually the last couple of months, I had the chance to rejoin the team, the applied swine nutrition team here at K-State, as Dr. Bob Goodband and Dr. Mike Tokash headed towards retirement. It opened up some faculty opportunities, and this was a program I always told myself if I had the chance to come back, I'd have to look pretty hard. And so those doors opened, and so here I am back at K-State. So that's kind of my background and what got me here today.
Josh, thanks for sharing your background with our listeners. I want to turn to today's topic, which is biosecurity. Most farms have a biosecurity plan and procedures in place, but having a plan for employees doesn't always translate into consistent execution. Where do you see the biggest gaps between a farm's biosecurity policy on paper and what actually happens day to day at the farm gate level?
Yeah, it's really important as a producer, as a production system, to establish those biosecurity protocols. Most of the time we can't always eliminate every risk or all of the risk of disease entry into a farm facility. But we can take steps to lower that risk as much as possible. And I think typically where I've seen failure is we as leaders do a good job of putting together the mental fortitude of establishing a policy or a plan, and then typically it's the communication, the training, and the follow up with the individuals who we expect to execute it every day, down at the slat level, the caretakers, the barn managers. Typically, it's the communication and flow of information to them that we struggle with. And typically, the biggest opportunities for improved execution of those established policies is typically where we have the most opportunity. Is how do we educate and communicate those expectations on process execution? How do we provide feedback to those caretakers? Are we doing a good job? Are there opportunities for improvement? And then how are we feeding that information back, right? We want to have a clear line of communication where the caretakers can feel comfortable and confident relaying their perspective back to their supervisors and back to the leadership team. Sometimes the greatest ideas on paper, when you actually go to the barn and look at the situation and the setup, you say, oh man, yeah, we were totally expecting something different. And yeah, with this facility design, you can't execute it this way. So what's a proper alternative that can still achieve our goals and our concepts, but in a way that you can perform every day? So I'd say that level of communication is where um, where we fall short sometimes.
And biosecurity is, of course, not a new topic. We have spent years, decades in the livestock industry talking about biosecurity. So, from your perspective, do you think that farms and production practices are more prepared than we were maybe 5 or 10 years ago? Or are we just more aware of the risks and the policies that we need to put in place to prevent some of those disease concerns?
Yeah. Um, are we more aware? I do think we are. The U.S. swine industry continues to mature and become more mature as an industry. 30 years ago, there was a ton of expansion, growth, and development. Now a lot of that's been slowed down, and you're kind of reaching the mature state where you're trying to make the facilities, the resources that you have more efficient, right? And so I think over time we've gotten much more aware, but the pressures that come in today's swine industry are pretty different than what they were 30 years ago. Some of the pathogens that we deal with today are more infectious than they were. So I need much less of the material to cause sickness and disease. So that puts more pressure on your biosecurity policies and processes than what we may be used to. And then obviously, I mean, things like pig density, right? I mean, where the pigs are now is typically there for scales of efficiency and for cost. But when you look at things, it puts a lot of pigs in a very small area, which then puts more pressure on your biosecurity processes, and puts a lot more pressure on our ability to maintain or to segregate health statuses because of just the density of operations and volume of pigs in a specific area.
So, Josh, as we think about getting tactical and actually talking through putting that policy or that plan in place, what are some of the important characteristics or watchouts that you always advise folks to be including in those plans?
Yeah, I think there's got to be some major fundamental concept understanding. The why behind the process or the protocol. I always like to use examples of, if we're talking about mortality removal that's happening on a farm, what is the biggest risk that the caretaker needs to be aware of? Well, typically the biggest risk is that you're introducing pathogens back into the barn from the mortality collection area, right? So what are the processes or steps that we're going to take to reduce that risk? try to eliminate it as much as possible. So typically, um, what happens is if the individuals who perform the job every day, if they understand the main goals associated with the process, um, it really helps them to execute it at a high level. Or if there's variation from the process that needs to occur, they're confident and comfortable communicating that to others to update the policy to execute at a high level, or identify potential gaps that need to be addressed effectively and immediately. So I think that's one area from a tactical standpoint that's required is during that communication cascade and process that the large goals and objectives associated with preserving health status, reducing pathogen entry risk, they need to be communicated effectively so that the individuals doing the job understand the why behind what they're trying to perform. Um, you know, you see a lot of times when there's failures, a lot of times uh, individuals trying to check the box, right? I've got this list of tasks that I have to perform every day, and that mountain of responsibilities and tasks can get overwhelming. And so making sure that those individuals are thinking and aware of their situation while they're performing those tasks is really important. Sometimes they just put their heads down and it's, hey, I got to check the box, I got to get this done. But it's making sure they're taking a step back and saying, why why do I have to do this task a certain way? What am I trying to accomplish? And making sure they understand what the score is. So you have to have a way to measure their success or failure, and you have to follow up. I think as leaders, sometimes we don't spend enough time with the in the field with the individuals performing the work and really providing them good, honest feedback. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, can this be better? Hey, let's make sure that we're focused on this while we're performing this task. Asking them questions, receiving their feedback too, because sometimes that's the best way that we can identify, ways to improve the process to make it easier to execute. So I think you got to have a way to measure it. You've got to be able to instill the general large reasons behind why we perform the task and the goals associated with performing the task correctly, to really be able to convey that message on to the team and build a culture around execution.
So, as you think about implementing that policy or plan, what does effective training look like? Is showing someone the procedure enough, or what steps do we need to take to make sure that employees feel comfortable asking those questions and making sure they understand?
Yeah, I think it's a multifaceted approach. It starts with bringing those employees in. I mean, today, as you look at most of our labor force that's coming into the swine industry, a lot of them don't have much hands-on pig experience. So it's about really trying to provide them with the tools that they need up front to feel confident and comfortable executing. Again, bringing those goals and objectives associated with the why behind those tasks, and then it takes it's not a one stop check the box follow up. It requires time for that individual to train with other caretakers, to understand the established culture. So that's why it's so important to maintain a culture of biosecurity. If there's a practice or a process that the other employees don't believe in, then the likelihood that they're going to spend time and train that new employee up on the importance and the expectation around execution is going to be slim to none, because they don't feel like it's an important step towards protecting the health or the herd from pathogen entry. So I think those are really important things. And then there's never a time when supervisor follow up is not needed. Again, I think about we all have a million things going on every day, right? So, but that follow up, that time that a manager takes to work with their team members on process execution, sometimes those are the most meaningful things. The employee understands how they're being measured. They understand that there are trusting and safe, channels of communication from the supervisor to them, and vice versa, so that when there are issues, they can communicate it. So I think that's something that never ends. The time that a manager can spend with their people on a farm is incredibly beneficial. It doesn't matter if we're talking about biosecurity process, production process, team development, building. Those things are incredibly important in establishing a level of trust with the supervisor and their team members, and then also a culture of accountability. Not being afraid to have those hard conversations, and holding each other accountable to a standard.
I think that's really helpful from an employee perspective, but from a manager perspective, how can they tell whether an employee truly understands a biosecurity procedure that's been put in place? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think if I say communication anymore, you're going to get tired of it, but it really is. It's about the communication. For a supervisor to understand if those individuals are competent in process understanding, you know, you can obviously do the process with them. You can have those individuals explain the process, make sure that they understand those, larger goals and objectives associated with it. Ask them questions and non-leading questions. Hey, you're getting ready to perform mortality removal. Just explain to me before we do it. Just explain to me how we're going to get this done and get mortality from this nursery room out to the dead collection area, and just have them explain it, right? I mean, typically if an individual can sit down and explain the process fully, they understand it. Now, you can't always guarantee that they're going to execute it that way, but they understand the concepts behind it. Typically, most human beings want to do the right thing, right? So um, they are going to do the right thing if they understand it, and if there aren't outside constraints that limit their ability to perform the job. One of the biggest things that I think is hard, it's always hard to balance, is workload, right? And so when those individuals, hey, so and so's out, I need you to cover twice as much space over the next week while that individual's out. Well, now you put a ton of pressure on that person to get their jobs done every day. And then it comes back to, what kind of culture do you have as a company, as a business? Because you definitely don't want to be a culture that sacrifices biosecurity when you get put under a little pressure. So, making sure that you can have those honest conversations with employees. If they're stressed, if they're working and they're worn out, what is the plan to divert some of that pressure? What is the thought process on trying to simplify things? You hope that you can put together a plan that doesn't jeopardize biosecurity, but you've got to be willing and open as a manager to receive that feedback and try to put your people in the best place to succeed.
You bring up an important point. Biosecurity can't just be about checking a box or following a protocol because it is required. Employees also need to understand that their actions directly affect the health and well-being of the animals in their care. How do you think those owner-operators can help employees make that connection and create a stronger sense of ownership around biosecurity?
I think it's a little bit of the old saying of, an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure, right? I mean, for most individuals that have, you know, unfortunately dealt with health challenged pig populations in their professional careers, there's nothing more disheartening. There's nothing more frustrating and challenging than dealing with sick pigs. So really helping employees understand that the things that they do every day make a difference. Being able to put together quality metrics that show and tie the impact of biosecurity execution to disease outbreak rates. Those are ways that can meaningfully build a culture um, of understanding and time and focus around biosecurity efforts. Probably in my experience, some of the hardest ones to, if you're working with individuals that are specialized, someone who's going to touch multiple farms within the course of the day, within the course of the week, but aren't full-time farm employees. Sometimes those are the hardest individuals to really establish that culture with, because they don't always see the negative impacts of poor health of the animals. It doesn't necessarily always impact their day to day, and so that takes a little bit more time. That takes even more effort from supervisors and from managers to really instill in them that, hey, the things that you do every day can impact the health and well-being of the pigs that we raise. So, you are just as responsible for biosecurity as the farm employee that showers into the farm every day. And in some cases, you can be potentially more of a risk, because you do see and touch so many different populations in the same specific time frame or time horizon. So it's incredibly important to reach them. And I think that again comes back to culture, how you train those individuals up front, how you hold them to certain expectations, and explain to them how important they are to the business, how they fit, why they matter, and then what's the score? How do we measure their success or failure and impact as it relates to biosecurity?
You have mentioned the importance of culture throughout our conversation, Josh. So, can you share a little bit more about how building a strong biosecurity culture helps farms achieve their biosecurity goals?
So much of biosecurity is about culture. It's about being confident that people understand the expectation that we're holding them to, and that they're performing that job when nobody's looking, right? That those are incredibly important. And so sometimes it's the culture of holding each other accountable. You have to be willing, as farm employees working in the same farm, to know that, hey, if I make a mistake, so and so is going to let me know about it. And know that, hey, it's nothing malicious, but it's constructive feedback so that we all improve. I think that's building that culture, is something that's really important to drive home these concepts, and to execute these policies at a high level to mitigate risk, and to to protect the health of the animals.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that when you hear the word biosecurity, you automatically think that it is more of a science and there are metrics and data points and things like that to collect. And certainly there are, but to your point, it's really also a little bit of a soft skill to make sure that people understand and the culture is there to balance that. So I think that was a good flag that you made as well.
Yep, it's 100% a culture. It's a little bit of the right. You do it doing the things when nobody's looking, that are incredibly important, even on the hard days, right? It's Saturday afternoon at 4, and I just want to get out of here, but I've got a few things to finish up, and I'm going to do them the right way. Um, those are things. Culture shows up when it's under pressure, right? And so, um, can those behaviors, are they there when you need them most?
So, as you think about biosecurity practices to put in place, I think the obvious ones come to mind, like some facilities shower in, shower out, or they have a line of separation, or they recognize changing boots and things like that between buildings. What are some of the non-obvious biosecurity measures that you've seen people put in place that really can move the needle?
I think those are really important ones. Anytime that you can put some type of physical barrier that requires a change in behavior, that helps. I think it helps provide kind of a little bit different level of respect than just a line of separation. That's why I think there's been such a resurgence in communication and wean to finish systems or facilities of, hey, why don't we just put a Danish bench here, a boot bench that forces you to perform a process to cross that bench. rather than, yeah, I know I see the line and I'm not supposed to cross it, but I really need to get this done, and I can just step over it and move on. So I think those have been some facility investments that are simple enough, but have done quite well. Um, I think from a metric standpoint, it varies a little bit. Biosecurity is so in depth and comprehensive. Anything that touches a farm is a risk, right? So, how you handle mortality removal, feed delivery processes, it may be, equipment entry, supply entry into the farm, employee entry, obviously. Do I have outside visitors or outside individuals who enter the facility to perform maintenance work? And what are their processes from the time, prior to arriving at my facility um, to where they go after they leave? I do think continuing to automate some of those processes from a decision making standpoint, things like the technologies that are starting to help people track downtime, and tie those downtime requirements to their day-to-day movements across farms. I think those are tools that, as systems have implemented, just the potential biosecurity breaches that are occurring are going down, because you're essentially taking the human error out of some of those decisions. If I have a program where, once I know where I'm supposed to go, I can plug it in and I can quickly determine, um, through the program, do I have the right downtime or not to enter that facility? It just completely eliminates the risk that I misinterpret the downtime requirements to move from site A to site B. And I think it makes people processes much more efficient and reduces risk. So I think those are things that are steps that are beneficial. On-site assessments, again, supervisor spending time with the employees in the field. Hey, it's time to go do mortality removal. Let me ride along with you. Okay, let me just assess and determine, are we following process? Are we respecting, clean, dirty lines? Are we changing footwear? Are we performing this task at the end of the day? And I'm not going back in front of pigs, to ensure that I've got more downtime before I re-enter the facility. Those are all things that just take time, and it doesn't have to be mortality removal. It can be people entry processes. It can be supply entry, but taking the time for supervisors to spend with their employees and provide some type of scored assessment and feedback to the employees of how we're doing, I think are incredibly important. And those metrics that are coming from those scores typically can be correlated to disease outbreak rate.
Josh, what about reviewing the plans? How often should we be reviewing our biosecurity plans to see if any updates need to be made?
Yeah, I think it can vary a little bit. It depends on if you're having any major facility upgrades or changes. I think it can also be pressured and tied to disease outbreaks, right? If you go through a rash of outbreaks in a specific region or a specific area, then we need to be performing outbreak investigations, collating that information, and determining, are the processes adequate or not. And if they're not, what modifications can we make to strengthen those procedures? So I'd say that it can vary, but it should always be something that's the front of everybody's mind. We don't set it and forget it. It's something that we need to come back to and revisit. And I think it comes back to a little bit of the humility of everybody understanding that you can't eliminate the risk completely. So being open to review processes and determine, are there better ways to do it? Those are always on the table.
Josh, what about, if you think about a farm that has a strong plan but weak execution, what is that maybe a first easy step they can take to close the gap?
Yeah, I think it takes that on farm education, discussion, and follow up. If you feel like you're struggling with execution, then spending the time with the employees. Why are we failing? Do we understand why we're asked to perform these tasks. And if they're not, then it's taking the time to educate and retrain, and then it's following up on execution in the future. If it's failure, employees understand, and we're still failing. Is it some type of facility limitation or pressure? Sometimes again it comes back to the, potentially the farm staff are performing at a high level, but is there another shared resource or area that we need to investigate and understand better, that may be more of a pressure point? Those are things that just come from the on-farm experience and follow-up. You can't fly in and tell them they're doing bad and then come back a year later and shake your head and say nothing got better. It takes that follow-up, that discussion of, hey, here guys, this is where we're not performing the way we need to. Let's sit down and come up with a plan to rectify the issue. And then in a week, I'm going to be back, and we're gonna go through it again. We're gonna validate things again, and just providing that level of feedback and support, knowing that not everybody's going to be perfect, but that we're going to set the expectation of what should be accomplished and what needs to happen, and we'll help write the plan of how to get there. Now it's up to you guys to get there. So, and we'll be back to make sure we get there. So I think it's all those parts and pieces. Sometimes we don't always do a good job supporting the farm to get them the plan to rectify the issues and get them back to where they need to be. Sometimes we don't do a great job of following up on it, and making sure that it has been implemented the way it should be, or that the employees do completely understand the processes and are getting them executed.
When it comes to building a strong biosecurity culture, how can producers help employees recognize that every action, even the routine ones, plays a role in preventing pathogen entry?
I think the one thing that can be, from that culture building standpoint, that can be challenging is, you have individuals, probably one of the biggest, say, demotivator. Everything that we do is a risk for pathogen entry. And when you go back through and you perform a lot of times you perform an outbreak investigation, and you come out, rarely do you ever find the smoking gun, right? You rarely ever find the 100% confident reason that a pathogen's entered a facility, but you go through and you reassess your risk. Where did we have gaps? Where are areas that we need to improve so that we can avoid this in the future? And probably one of the biggest things that's can be a demotivator is you find a task or a process where employees say, well, I've been doing it this way for 3 years and I've never had a break until now. And so, again, it's really helping them understand that, yeah, you may have been lucky enough to not have a break until now, but until we button up this process or execute this differently, there's always going to be a risk. And that risk may be 1 in 10, it may be 1 in 20, but there's always a risk. And so, um, helping convey that message, because, we shape our opinions based on our experiences, right? And if an individual says, well, I've done it this way for 3 years and I never had a problem until now, it's something that we need to account for in our risk assessment, but it's also something that we need to work with those teams on understanding. Okay, well, yeah, you might have gotten by with it, but still not the level of a process execution that we need to be at, because we're still not accomplishing the major goal associated with this policy. So I think those are things that sometimes you get incredibly experienced individuals, but they can kind of get stuck in their way of, well, but it's always been this way. We've always gotten by with this, and really making sure that they understand the why behind why we should strive to improve, and why 30 years ago is different than now with some of these pathogens and diseases that we deal with.
Putting a biosecurity plan into action takes more than a protocol on paper. It requires a strong culture of accountability, consistency, and communication on the farm between supervisors and employees alike. As we heard today, there is a lot to consider when it comes to on-farm biosecurity, and it all starts with great communication. Thank you to Dr. Josh Flohr for coming on today's episode, and thank you to all of you, our listeners, for tuning into today's conversation. We'll be back next month with another timely conversation on all things swine. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the PigX Podcast.
PigX is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. PigX, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.